Welcome back, writers, to this ongoing conversation about things that we can do to make sentences stronger. You might remember from the first episode on responsibility that when we're crafting sentences, we're always trying to get our full message across in as few words as possible. And that is a great lead-in to today's topic, less is more. In architecture, less is more refers to the idea that simplicity is better than complexity when you're designing buildings, because simplicity lets the natural beauty of the structure show through. And the same is true for writing. The simpler we can make our sentences, the more accessible they are to our readers, and that's exactly what we want. So, as it relates to writing, when we say less is more, we mean we want to get the most out of every sentence by using exactly as many words as necessary, no more and no less. And that might seem counterintuitive because we're accustomed to thinking that more is better, but sometimes more is just messier. So my goal for today is just to convince you that using as few words as possible is better than clogging up your sentences with unnecessary words. So that's my only goal for today, is to convince you that less is more. Let's start with this quote from Winston Churchill. This report, by its very length, defends itself against the risk of ever being read. Churchill understood the value of word economy. He knew that nobody ever sat down to read anything thinking, gee, I hope this is really long. And you and I know that too, because we're readers as well as writers. So we need to craft our sentences in a way that is kind to readers, in a way that doesn't waste the reader's time, or they won't be our readers for very long. Let's take a look at this sentence we've all heard many times, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. Simple, strong, clean. Do you think Dr. King's message would have been stronger if he had said, I have a great, extraordinary, momentous, really important, history-altering dream? Do you think we'd be quoting him today if he had said that? I don't think so. And there's nothing wrong with any of those words. They're strong, accurate, descriptive, but they muddy the message. They make it harder for the reader to see the message, which is, I have a dream. So as we're sitting at our computers crafting our sentences, a good thought to keep in the back of our minds is, just because we can include certain words doesn't mean we should. We need to be selective and we need to be thrifty. Just like spring cleaning, we need to be ruthless and keep only what we absolutely need. As an example, let's look at two sentences by two different authors, one who appreciated the concept of less is more and one who did not. The first one is by Gore Vidal. I know, it is scary long, but this is just one sentence. There is no closing punctuation until the very end. And you know what, I'm not even going to read this out loud. It is just so long. Honestly, I don't know what Gore Vidal was thinking here. A lesson that we can take from this very heavy sentence is that sometimes instead of burdening our reader with a very heavy sentence like that, we could break it up into two smaller sentences, or in this case, 6 or 7 smaller sentences. 2 or 3 simple sentences are easier for the reader to process than one long run-on sentence. Okay, let's look at a sentence from another author who really did get less is more. On the faraway island of Salamasond, Yertle the turtle was king of the pond. Again, just like I have a dream, this sentence is simple, strong, clean. Dr. Seuss didn't use a single unnecessary word in this sentence. You could argue that far away isn't 100% necessary, but when you consider that this is a poem, you really do need far away to preserve the rhythm of the verse. So another helpful thought to keep in the back of our minds as we're crafting our sentences is to write as if you had to pay for every word. As you're crafting your documents and you're questioning whether to include a certain word or not, ask yourself, would you pay $5 for that word? Is it worth it to you? And really try to feel the pain of parting with $5 to keep that word in your sentence. And maybe you would. If you can defend your choice to keep that word in your sentence, then you know it's a keeper. This can be a very valuable exercise. Okay, so enough about famous writers. Let's look at some writing that comes from everyday communications. And whatever else might be wrong with these sentences, right now we're just going to concern ourselves with this idea that less is more. Can we make these sentences better by eliminating words? The first sentence comes from a recruitment brochure. A medical interpreter must have a wide range of skills and knowledge, including, but not limited to, strong fluency in both English and another language, knowledge of medical terminology and of anatomy and physiology, well-developed memory and retention skills, and a thorough understanding of and dedication to the medical interpreter standards of practice. So the first thing we have to do is just recognize that this sentence is overwritten. There are way more words here than necessary to get the message across. So our challenge is to preserve the message while making the sentence as tight and clean as possible for the reader. There's no magic to it. It's a process. We're going to be assessing every word and deciding which words need to go and which words are important enough to keep. And feel free to hit pause if you want to look at the sentence on your own before you see what I do with it, because there's no right or wrong here. Your way will be just as good as my way, as long as we take out all the unnecessary words. So I'm going to quickly walk you through my thought process for the changes I'm going to make. And bear with me because I'm going to get really nitty-gritty here, because I want you to see the rationale behind the choices I'm making. Writing is a series of choices. So the first thing that my eye goes to is the phrase including but not limited to. And full disclosure, I just hate this phrase. When you say including in the body of the text, you're not implying that what comes next is an all-inclusive list. So there's no need to say but not limited to. It's a waste of the reader's time. Similarly, I go down to the phrase understanding of and dedication to. Do you really need both of these? If you have a dedication to something, you probably also have an understanding of it. So there's no need to say both. And this is a common thing that writers do. And in cases like this, I usually choose one or the other, the word that's either most true or most relevant, and go with that one. Okay, what about the opening, a medical interpreter? We're really talking about all medical interpreters, right? Not just one. So I would change that to medical interpreters, plural. And I know this sounds like a small thing, but every word you save is going to make this sentence easier for the reader to process. And this is the level of detail we need to pay attention to. The next thing that catches my eye is this wide range of skills and knowledge. Do we need both skills and knowledge? We use the word knowledge further on in the sentence, so I don't think we need to say it twice. And what about both? Both English and another language. Do we need it? I wouldn't be willing to pay $5 for it, so I'm going to lose the word both. And what about and of anatomy and physiology? And that sounds clunky to me, and I don't think the sentence needs it, so I wouldn't pay for it. I'm going to get rid of and of. How about memory and retention skills? To me, memory and retention mean almost the same thing, or at least they're similar enough that I wouldn't waste the reader's time by including both of them. So I would choose whichever word was more important or more likely to be understood by the reader and use that one. And the same goes for anatomy and physiology. They're so similar, I would just pick one and use that. Okay, so I've identified a number of changes that I would make to this sentence to make it more palatable for the reader. Let's take a look at how this sentence would read if we made those changes. Medical interpreters must possess a wide range of skills, including fluency in English and another language, a good memory, knowledge of anatomy and medical terminology, and a commitment to medical interpreter standards of practice. So this is better. It's definitely cleaner, but it's still a mouthful, right? And you can see the original sentence there, so you can compare the before and after, and feel free to hit pause if you want to just be with that for a moment. In general, it's a good idea when you're listing things in the body of the text, as we are in the sentence, to keep that list to just 3 things, the 3 most important things you want to convey. So for this sentence, I might trim it further to read, medical interpreters must possess a wide range of skills, including fluency in English and another language, a good memory, and knowledge of anatomy and medical terminology. 1, 2, 3 things in the list. I think this tightened version preserves the salient information from the original sentence, and it's easier for the reader to understand. And any information that doesn't make it into our tightened version, we can either put it in a separate sentence, or maybe we just decide that it's not that important after all, and we just cut it entirely. Another option, and if it's appropriate for the kind of document we're creating, would be to put the items in the list in the form of bullet points to make it extra easy for the reader to visualize. And these are the kinds of choices we make every time we construct a sentence. That's what writing is, choices. This next passage comes from a military grant application. Our personnel have a long history of developing power amplifiers. This experience has brought a very successful record to our company in many power amplifier grant programs, as shown in Table 1. These programs provide innovative approaches to solve various technical challenges facing military programs. Again, we need to recognize that the passage is overwritten, that there are more words than necessary. Sometimes a more efficient way to approach a sentence isn't to go about it word by word, as we did in the last example, but rephrase or paraphrase an entire thought into a shorter, more concise version of itself. But you know what? Before we do that, I just want to point out one little thing here. The opening. Our personnel have a long history. Personnel is one of those words that nobody's ever sure whether it's singular or plural, so they don't know what kind of verb to use with it. And often, no matter which verb they choose, it just doesn't sound right. So for that reason alone, I would use a different word for this particular sentence construction. And again, these are the kinds of choices that we're always making. All right, so having said that, this is how I would rephrase this passage into a shorter, more succinct version of itself. Our company, instead of personnel, our company has a long history of designing power amplifiers. We have an impressive record of providing solutions for the technical challenges facing the military. In parentheses, see Table 1. And you can see the original there, so you can compare the before and after. And as you can see, the words are a little different, but the message, the spirit of what this writer was trying to say is the same, and I would argue better, because in the revised version, it's easier for the reader to see the message. You would rephrase this passage in your own way because every writer has their own unique voice, but yours would be just as good and just as tight as long as you were thinking of ways to get your full message across in as few words as possible. So sometimes tightening sentences word by word is the best approach, and sometimes rephrasing or paraphrasing is the best approach, as we saw in the last two examples. Sometimes, though, it's not that clear which approach is better, and so we end up using a kind of hybrid method. And this sentence from a corporate retreat communication is a good example. In a team, it's vital that there is regular communication happening between teammates, but it is even more essential that part of that communication is in celebrating the progress of an individual or a team. So to my writer's ear, this sentence it's too long, but more to the point, it's muddy, right? I have a sense of what the writer is trying to say, but the message gets lost in the clunkiness. So as we're looking at different ways to tighten sentences, we also want to make sure that the message is clear. Sometimes we find ourselves tightening and clarifying at the same time. So let's look at one way we could rework this sentence. And there are many ways, so trust your own writer's instincts. This is what I came up with. Regular communication among teammates is vital, but just as essential is celebrating the achievements of individual team members and the team as a whole. To me, this seems like what the writer was trying to say. We preserved the idea that regular communication is vital and that celebrating the team and the individual is also a high priority. But we conveyed that message in fewer words and in a much clearer sentence. Okay, just one more quick example, because I don't want to leave you with the impression that long sentences are the only ones that can be tightened. Let's look at this sentence from a letter of recommendation. I hope you agree with me that Sally is the right candidate for this prestigious grant. So not a lot of excess here, but what about the words with me? Do we lose anything if we take the words with me out of that sentence so that it reads, I hope you agree that Sally is the right candidate for this prestigious grant? You may think that that's a picky little detail, but it's the picky little details that take your writing to the next level. If we fix every picky little detail, then we know we've crafted the strongest possible message and we've made it as easy as possible for the reader to understand it. And that's our mission every time we sit down to write. Okay, so those are my examples. Let's look at some takeaways from today's episode on Less is More. We said that as we craft our message, we want to use exactly as many words as necessary, no more and no less. We said that just because we can include certain words doesn't mean we should include them. We need to be selective and ruthless. We want to write as if we had to pay for every word. That will help us to be selective and keep only the words we absolutely need. To tighten very long sentences, we talked about breaking them up into shorter sentences or perhaps using bullet points if it's appropriate for the document we're creating. We mentioned that we can use a word-by-word approach to editing or simply rephrase or paraphrase whole passages. And it's worth noting that it's not just long sentences that can be tightened. So I hope I was able to convince you that less really is more when it comes to writing. And not just because I say so, but because you've seen it with your own writer's eye and you really do believe it. Writing is like any other skill. Once you start paying attention to the mechanics of it and the nuances of it, you start to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And you probably write hundreds of sentences every day between texting and email and any other writing that you might do for work or recreation. Every sentence you write, no matter what the medium is an opportunity to practice. You know enough already about what makes a good sentence to start tightening and strengthening your sentences right now. If you really start paying attention to how you put words on the page and applying the concepts that we're talking about here, and using every sentence you write as an opportunity to practice, I promise you're going to see a difference. You're going to see an improvement in your writing. All right, that's it for today. The quick tip we're going to talk about next time has to do with the word the. It's a simple little tip, but it's a good one. I'll see you then.